The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome back to another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. Hopefully you enjoyed the last episode that featured the recent 2-year anniversary Brewfest at Stormhouse Brewing in North Palm Beach. By the time this episode gets released, we will have gone to it. Probably had an absolutely great time. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm sure that we'll probably be recording some audio and getting that released on a future episode. That being said, we've got some other great interviews to go through, and this is going to be one of them. We are heading down to Miami, actually North Miami Beach specifically, and Lost City Brewing Company. Now, couple things for you. First and foremost, I'm a sucker for anything that looks old and archaeological. I mean, Indiana Jones is like the greatest film series of all time, and having a brewery that sort of absorbed and enjoyed all of that's just phenomenal. Second, they have been around for a hot minute, not gonna lie. They are almost a permanent fixture at the North Miami Brewfest, which is still one of my absolute favorites in the state of Florida. And I feel bad that it took me as long as it did to finally go and visit them. But I did. It was a nice late morning, and co-founder and head brewer Daniel Morales was there doing a brew cycle. And so I was able to sit down with him and kind of understand a little bit about Lost City, understand a little bit about Abraxas, which, if you know, was a very, very old craft beer bar on Miami Beach. And Lost City kind of has some of the same things as Abraxas, including the owner of Abraxas is one of the co-founders at Lost City. And they even titled the tap room itself the Abraxas Lounge at Lost City Brewing Company. But we're going to talk about all of that with Daniel as we try a bunch of amazing beers that you are going to be seeing on FloridaBeerBlog.com. So definitely keep an eye out there. But enough of me. I know you want to listen to Daniel Morales, co-founder and head brewer at Lost City Brewing Company. Enjoy. I guess give us a little history about before Lost City. Give us a little history of Fourth Age Brewing.
Okay. Oh, so you do remember Fourth Age?
A little while ago, yeah.
We pretty much we had a buddy that took the FIU brew course back in like the 2009, 2010. And we were just bored at his house one day. He's like, "Hey, you guys just want to learn how to brew?" He pulled out an old extract kit that had probably been sitting in a closet for over a year and a half and brewed, and that kind of started this downward spiral of getting into the industry.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I guess it's a jump to go from an extract kit to, showing your beers off at Grovetoberfest and stuff like that. How many years do you think that was between extract kit to?
Not even a full year.
Really?
Yeah. We started brewing mid to late 2011. I think we did the first Grovetoberfest probably a year and a half, probably 2013. I think it was the first time we entered anything at Grovetoberfest, but it was pretty quick.
That's amazing. And I guess that just speaks to how the craft beer industry was back then. It was a little bit looser, a little bit more Wild West.
There was nothing down here. The only thing we had was Titanic. When it wasn't open yet, it was literally nothing here. Like when we went to go get good beer, we'd go to that Stop and Shop next to Titanic Brewery because I had a pretty good bottle selection. We had to go far and wide to actually find good beer. Like it wasn't readily available. Nobody was really pouring anything locally made because pretty much didn't exist other than Cigar City.
So then I guess the big question is, why beer? Why not do something that was a little bit more locally available and something where you could actually talk to more than just the one guy making these things?
I don't know. It just felt like I have a love for cooking. I took a lot of culinary courses in high school and college, and it just felt like a natural step. Is just the whole process is very involved, and I like the small details of things, and just kind of was engrossed by it. Like, try to consume all media I possibly could. Even on, what was it, Northern Brewery used to have their own series, and I pretty watched all those episodes religiously, just to like, try and pick up any little bit of information we could.
That's awesome. And you mentioned a few other things. Obviously, we spoke about FIU's brewing course,
Yep.
which I'm a big fan of, and I'm sure a lot of people here are. And then you mentioned internships. In
We did do
places, Panama.
We went to Colombia for like Bogota for a weekend and did this like a quick little collab brew of our lemongrass blonde at Bogota Beer Company, and went down there for a few days, got to check out the old brewery, sourced lemongrass locally at a market, and brewed the beer, and then just came right back home. I think the batch was lost, like somebody didn't clean the fermenter right, so nothing came of that batch. But about a year later, we went down to Panama City, Panama, and brewed at the La Dorada, which is like a brew pub that's owned by the same guy who owns Bogota Beer Company. And we were pretty much put up there for a month and brewed 6 days out of the week just on a 10 hectoliter system, DME, and just learned the ropes hands on.
That's amazing. Well, I guess, what was the original concept for Fourth Age? Was this something where you were just playing around, or did you have in the back of your mind this vision of a grand Cigar City style empire here in
At
Miami?
first, it was really just a hobby at first. I think maybe 2 years into it, we maybe had an inkling. It's like, hey, some of the stuff is pretty decent. I think we could go, obviously improve it much better. But we're like, I think we could do this if we wanted to. Probably do this, go pro. And we just kept pushing from there, seeing what we could do. Granted, a lot of us didn't come from moneyed backgrounds, so it was just an uphill battle to find whatever, cash we could.
And back in those days, especially, I guess, the Wild West days of Grovetoberfest and whatnot, do you think a lot of the brewers that were presenting there were just there to be hobbyists and just, here's what I'm doing, maybe this will be kind of fun? Or do you think it's more like things are nowadays, where it's like, I'm here to
promote a brand that hopefully will be open,
and attract investors?
I think there's a little bit of both, but I think there's a bunch of groups back in the day, like the Moron Brothers and the Hialeah Brewing Company, that might have had an inkling that wanted to go pro, but they were living other lives, and it's not as easy as just, hey, we're gonna go and open up a brewery. It's a big time commitment. You got to change careers. People have families already, so But there was a big group of hobbyists back in the day, especially with MASH. MASH just really helped elevate a lot of people and brought a lot of knowledge.
MASH being Miami Area Society of Homebrewers.
Yes.
Cool. Got that. Acronyms, yay.
And before them too, there used to be the first homebrew store that was readily available in our area. It used to be called Brewbox Miami. We took a bunch of courses there when they were first opened, but that place is crashed and burned pretty quick. So
I wonder why. I don't know. So let's switch gears then, definitely, and we have to talk about Abraxas.
Sure.
Which we're technically sitting in what used to be Abraxas, which was a pretty well-renowned craft beer bar from what I
Abraxas
remember.
was. We used to be patrons there back in the late 2000s up until the day they closed. The bar here and the couches are all original from the bar from South Beach.
Really?
Yeah, so the mirror, the
Interesting.
actual bar itself, and that black couch back there.
Yeah, I was going to
actually
say,
from Abraxas.
because if you take a look at the logo, and you can find the logo a few places, and we'll talk about the naming and why you decided to bring that in. When you take a look at the logo for Abraxas, this is definitely, I guess, Epcot futuristic.
It's
It definitely
got
feels
that-
like a South Beach.
It does have that 90s South Beach aesthetic.
Yes.
Which is our partner Diego Escobar. We used to be patrons of him back in the day, and we used to love Abraxas because that was one of the main places you could actually get new craft beer in Miami.
On South Beach.
On South Beach, there was nothing else
That
really.
makes no sense.
It's like you'd have to either go to the Abraxas, maybe the Room, which is a couple not that far from Abraxas, or Zeke's would have, a decent selection, the Abbey, but there was slim pickings back in the day.
That's amazing. So I guess it makes a little bit of sense that it closed, because that is the life cycle of a club on South Beach.
It didn't close because it went under. It closed because somebody bought the building and they refused to renew his lease. To this day, the building is still open. I mean, empty. There's nothing in there.
That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Somebody bought it up to turn into a boutique hotel. It's still empty to this day.
Gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
So then I guess, how did you and your partner from Fourth Age connect with Diego post Abraxas?
So I think Abraxas closed, in 2013, 2014, I think New Year's Eve. I think we ran into him again maybe in late 2015, 2016 at Wynwood Brewing, because I was working as a cellarman there. And
pre-buyout, back when it was still Wynwood.
Yeah, when it was still the original Wynwood. Yeah. I was there during the first initial purchase, but there was still a small percentage. Totally considered craft. I love those guys. Those guys gave me a lot of knowledge and resources at the time. But yeah, we met there, and we're telling them that we currently had walked away from another project, because we were hoping to open up another facility with the gentleman from Bogota Beer Company, and couldn't come to terms. So, we parted ways, amicably, and happened to run into Diego shortly after. And he had pretty much parted ways on a different project, and happenstance just brought us together, and, we started working together.
That's amazing. And so you found this space in North Miami Beach, and we are maybe 5 minutes away from the plaza where North Miami Brewfest is held every year. So that's kind of where you are. If you're listening, the area, that's where it is. It seems like the opening of Lost City took a little bit of time, but you had a remarkable amount of support coming from the municipality here.
Yes, definitely. We originally were looking to open up in the Kendall area, because that's where we all lived. Other than Diego, we all lived down south. We looked around that area. Not a lot of people were willing to rent out to anybody for brewery space. So a friend of ours, Z, who was one of the founding members, I think, of Brew FIU. He owns Standard Kegs now. He had mentioned to us that the city of North Miami had a CRA and was looking to, redevelop certain areas. So we started looking into it. They were offering some grants. We came over, scoped the place out, and thought, hey, this is actually probably a better area than Kendall, because there's literally no brewery between Wynwood and South Broward at the moment. So that's a perfect transition period. So this is probably a spot we should probably look into. Spent about a year and a half searching the area, found a location, leased it, and then went through all the rigmarole to actually get approved for the grant, which took a while. Got approved, but it took a while.
Interesting. And I guess with the grant, what kind of businesses were they specifically trying to attract?
They were doing a little bit of everything. Pretty much, the CRA is granted funds to restaurants, bakeries, dentists, childcare centers. They're doing a little bit of everything. This whole area we're in, there hasn't been a lot of development as of yet, but it is an arts and entertainment district that they're trying to build out. So us and our neighbors across the tracks, Epoga, were some of the first recipients in this arts and entertainment district for that grant.
Awesome. And obviously, this being a production facility for the production of alcoholic beverages, I would assume that North Miami Beach had never experienced something like that before. Was it sort of a learning process for the two of you, for both Lost City and the city of North Miami Beach, to sort of go together?
Actually, the city wasn't that bad. The city of North Miami was pretty understanding and didn't really get in the way too much when it came to permitting. The real big issue here was the county.
Really?
Because everything has to get submitted to the county first before it goes to the city. The city reviews things. If they have a question, they'll ask a question. For most part, they were pretty laid back with everything, and pretty much went with what the county said. But the county was a mess.
Well, I guess that, is it just the county being the county, or was there a lot of confusion with beer, because you are not the first brewery in Miami?
There's a lot of confusion about beer, because the way the county works is there's no division to deal with actual brewers, at least at the time. So you could get a reviewer that's never heard anything about a brewery. There's not one person in the department handling all the breweries, even though there's probably 13, 14 breweries before us. You're getting a random person. It took almost 12 months to get our building permit approved by Derm and air quality. We spent 2.5 months wasted on air quality because they wanted an engineer to prove that we weren't distilling alcohol into the air.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So, and they wouldn't take our word for it or any Google documents, so we had to go and pay for an outside engineer to write the brewing process for them, sign off on it, stamp it, and hand it over to them. And even then, it took like a month and a half of back and forth with them before they passed it through that department. And the problem with the county's permitting back then was you got to go through each department individually. Every time somebody has a note, it gets sent back, pull out the plans, resubmit it. It's got to go through everybody again, so make sure there was no changes on anything. So it's literally like a 30-day process every time.
I think I'm done with the interview. I don't know how to go on from that. How do you stay solid through that? Because, obviously if it's not open, you're not making revenue.
No.
But at the same time, your hands are really tied. If they want to pull it out, they pull it out. And that's all there is to it.
I think we paid almost 3 years of rent before we actually sold the beer. There's nothing we could do. Hands are tied. And maybe 3 months before we were about to open, we were getting close to finishing up. COVID hit.
Yeah. And I noticed you finally opened in September of 2020.
Technically, July 31st.
July 31st. That's even worse.
Yeah. The tasting room opened up to the public to actually sit down inside. It was the first Friday of October. Before then, the first 2.5 months we were open, we were literally just selling crowlers out of the door.
Gotcha. I was going to say, it's like, were you able to, and then how were you able to persuade people to come into this new brewery that finally just opened that you can't actually walk inside of to get beer to go home and get? How was that to get the word out?
Word of mouth, social media. We literally went and got, some Coroplast signs with H frames, went around the entire area of North Miami, just put them on every corner saying brewery, pointing this way. Just anything to attract people over here. That's
amazing. But it seemed to have worked.
It's definitely worked. Like since day one, we've always been able to pay the lights. Like since the first month. So yeah, definitely knocking on
that wood. Yep.
It's been growing steadily, little by little. Definitely a lot of room for improvement.
That is amazing. But I kind of want to pivot to the name.
Sure.
Because first and foremost, I love it. I love archaeology. I love history. I love all that other fun stuff. But you had Abraxas.
Yes.
As a name, that Diego brought in. You and your partner had Fourth Age.
Yeah.
And you ignored all of that. Well, first and foremost, why did we just not go with something that you already had?
Well, Fourth Age it's kind of like a Tolkien reference.
It's
kind of like, they're in the Third Age, and after that, the ring's destroyed. They technically go into the Fourth Age. We're kind of playing off that, but then
That's the Age of Man, if I'm correct.
Pretty much.
All right. My father was a big Tolkien nerd, so
pretty much a bunch of nerds over here. But at the same time, we're like, Tolkien Estate likes to go after people, and it's just like name. It's more of like messing around in the homebrew level. So we're like, let's switch it up. We already had a name. The Lost City was actually the name of our lemongrass Belgian blonde.
Okay.
Originally, that was named after the Andy Garcia movie about Cuba in the 50s.
All right.
But we decided to just re-theme completely off of Lost City because I did spend 4 summers in Spain working in archaeology for the university over there before I ever started doing anything with beer.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, let's pause on all of that. And let's talk about archaeology for a little bit because, in fact, I think they just found evidence of a brew pub in, where was it, Egypt?
Really? That I haven't seen any news of.
It just happened, but because realistically, a lot of people can say, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, is that beer basically started civilization.
That's what people say, and kind of makes sense, people were just like, man, this grain I left in a pot got wet, and I was brave enough to drink it. It's like, let's do more of that. They started cultivating grain because at the end of the day, it is a food staple.
Did you see a lot of evidence for beer or alcoholic beverages in some of the civilizations that you researched in your time?
When I was working I was pretty much an international coordinator for a study abroad program in the north of Spain. We were digging up a Celtic/Roman necropolis. So we were just digging up tombs throughout the summer. We'd find all those people were cremated, so they'd be, interned in urns, but they would always have offerings next to them, and usually there was an amphims filled with wine or beer residue, sometimes meat, things of that nature.
It's fascinating how that is such a major portion of, I guess, human civilization.
And there was still, literally on that field, there was barley growing over the actual, necropolis during parts of the year. That, and they also made, I think, beer from barley and acorns. Acorns.
Huh.
And bread from acorns.
Well, of course, absolutely. I'm going to put a pin in that conversation. Sure. We're going to come back to that. So let's go back to Lost City. Let's go back to the relative Andes Mesoamerican Lost City of Gold cartoon that the French and Japanese did in the 80s, which I was a huge fan of when it was on Nickelodeon. Thank you very much. With Esteban and all that other fun stuff. I don't know if you know that or not.
It's a little bit before my time.
Okay, gotcha. I'm just going to go ahead and unold myself. And I guess, is that kind of what you were looking for? So you got a lot of the iconography, you got a lot of the imagery, you got a lot of the influence from that sort of
we did, because we are in South Florida. There's a heavy Latin influence in South Florida, so it made more sense to do that than try to do Egypt or focus on European archaeology, because we are pretty much on this side of the world. So it just felt more natural. Really, Lost City, though, is kind of like an umbrella term. The whole idea behind it is that you're joining an expedition. You're going to find cultural touch points throughout each of the beers you're gonna be tasting, whether it's in Mesoamerica or Europe or Japan, wherever we're going.
That's awesome. And let's talk about those beers for a moment, because with them, I guess when you created the first lineup of recipes and you're looking at basically I'm pointing at tap handles right now, as if anybody can see other than the two of us. Where did you kind of go for your influence? Did you try to go for what is generally popular in the craft beer industry nowadays? Were you interested in the rather distinct Miami-Dade sort of feel for craft beer? What really did you go for?
Not really. We actually started brewing pretty traditional styles off the bat. So we started with an English mild, with a porter, with you have to have an IPA.
That's a requirement, yes.
Eventually it's kind of that same IPA has morphed into a hazy over the years, and it's a staple year round. We were heavy into home brewing, into Belgian beer, so we do have a selection of Belgian beers available as well, which not a lot of people offer down here.
Correct. And I find that interesting because a lot of, like you mentioned, the first beer that you brewed on the system here was a mild.
Was a mild.
You've got an amber in the tanks right now.
Yes.
These are very
old school.
They're very old school. They're very not hype.
No, not at all. I wouldn't say we're a hype brewery in any way, shape, or form.
Did you want to be, or
I just want to make good product, and hopefully people will come and drink it. We're pretty quiet guys here.
How much of that is your clientele asking for specific styles?
Sometimes we have clients. We do have sometimes a little older population in the area, so they've been asking for ambers or Scotch ales, things like that. I haven't brewed a Scotch ale yet, but their definition of craft beer is maybe what they thought craft beer was in the 90s. So it's going back.
A lot of anchor steam and
So trying to bring some of that to them so that, they're getting satisfied and, we're boosting numbers.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it's interesting, especially with some of the names that you have. One thing that I always like in the craft beer industry is when people will take history, either local history or the history that they know, and use that as inspiration, at least behind the nomenclature of the beers. And it looks like you've got a couple of those available either on tap now or year round.
Yeah.
I want to start with Oleta River.
Sure.
What is that?
So Oleta River is a national park. It's probably about 10 minutes north of us.
Okay.
That's a big paddleboarding, kayaking spot in North Miami. And, we were making our IPA. To be honest, we didn't really make many IPAs when we were home brewing.
Mm-hmm.
We were going more Belgian heavy stouts, pastry stouts, things of that nature. So when we did finally decide to brew an IPA over here, we're like, let's really bring it home as to what this should be named after. And Oleta River felt like a perfect fit.
That's amazing. What other kinds of things? Do you have any that are coming back from your old school archaeology days?
At the moment, Keeper of the Grail is literally a reference to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yeah, that's kind of an obvious one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, at the moment, I don't think there's anything archaeology like related at the moment.
In terms of the recipes, do you think you'll ever go back into that? Let's unpin that conversation. If, these ancient civilizations that you were working on were making beers with acorns, I've never heard of that before. Is that something that you'd like to try to dust off and do, kind of like
what
Dogfish Head was doing? Yeah.
Might be possible. I just needed to touch base with the people back in Spain and give me some information. But it's definitely not out of the conversation.
I'm going to call you out on something. With all of this archaeology talk that we've had, your ringtone on your phone is not the Indiana Jones theme song. It's Back to the Future.
It is Back to the
I'm
Future.
going to call you out. Calling you out right now.
Well, the other ringtone for text messages is literally the Lord of the Rings intro. So that or the sound effect from Close Encounters of the Third.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So it seems like you've got a rich, like centuries old brewing heritage that you have been interested in and that you can tap into. Is that something that would be positively received in the Miami brewing scene, or do you just not know yet?
Not really sure, but there are groups of people that really enjoy some of the old school things we brew. But we're so small, and beer doesn't really go super far out of here. We have limited distribution, so I can't say it's wide acceptance or not.
And I was going to say that because, one of the things we were looking around, obviously you've got the crowlers and the growlers, gorgeous growlers, by the way.
Thank you.
And you've got the cans available, mobile canning and whatnot. But a lot of this packaging is really just for in-house.
Yeah, we usually do about 200 cases every couple months through Ironheart, and I'd say 75% of that's sold in the tasting room. And
it's about what you need. Is there any push to really grow and to distribute and to contract brew from, a push from your customers or push from people outside?
That we would like to get a better foothold in the immediate area. Like we do distro, but it's more like in Kendall and further south, or in Broward. It's like South Fort Lauderdale area. Like we're not super far. This area has pretty much got a huge foothold through Eagle Brands and Gold Coast. It's kind of hard to get into some of these older establishments, but we're working on it. We finally hired one of the original partners on full time because we were all working day jobs and brewing full time for the first year and a half. So he finally left his job and he's working as marketing director and salesman.
That's
multi
awesome.
hats.
Yeah. And it's amazing how, especially with a small business like this, you have a couple people, and those couple people wear the hats to where it sort of towers over, like in the old Donald Duck cartoons.
We do a little bit of everything here.
Gotcha. Do you have any just, homegrown visions for the future? It's 2023 right now. By the time you hit to, just 2024, here's what I'd like to be brewing. Here's what I'd like to be producing. Here's where I'd like to go.
I just brewed a Kolsch, and I hope it hits really well because I think it's the most delicious beer we've ever brewed.
Really?
Yeah.
But it's amazing. It's such a simple style. It's and the tradition of, most of the U.S. is how many hops can you shove into your... Yeah, exactly. Is that...
Like Alita Rivers probably has, it's got Citra, Mosaic, Cascade, Simcoe, and Columbus. There's 5 hops in that one beer, so
that's enough.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a salad.
Yeah, basically.
There's about 52 pounds of hops in a 10-barrel batch. So,
gosh, that's amazing. And you think that something simple as a Kolsch will hit here in Miami-Dade?
Our 2 best-selling beers here in-house most of the year is the Alita River and our Mexican lager. Those just sells like hotcakes.
And you gave me the Mexican lager. That was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Nice and crisp. It actually might be one of the better Mexican lagers that I've had, period, because a lot of the time Mexican lagers are, hey, let's just let the beer skunk.
Yeah.
We were trying to make a Pilsner and we failed. This one was crisp and clean and did not have this excessive bitterness that makes me think that the batch should have been dumped.
Yeah.
So it's I understand that. That's fantastic. That's amazing. I cannot wait to see what else is coming.
Yeah, let me get you some other samples while we're...
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. So it was funny. Somebody from Facebook, one of our listeners, reached out to me independent of this episode and said I should really check out Lost City Brewing Company. I should really put them on the podcast because they have quite the storied history and some amazing beers. Little did they know that this episode was already in the can and close to getting released. So listener, if you're out there, I hope you appreciated the episode. I hope this was everything that you wanted and more. And I definitely learned a lot and had an absolutely fantastic time at Lost City. One of the things that I will definitely need to do is to publish a picture of the giant Louis Armstrong photo over by the restrooms. If you are familiar with Louis Armstrong, there's a big picture of him playing his famous trumpet in front of the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. And that is one of the things that they have at the tap room to sort of bring the whole Lost City vibe together. I don't know what that has anything to do with anything. I just think it was pretty cool. Next week, we have another festival coming up. It's not a beer festival. It's not even a liquid that's made here in the United States by law. But this is not the first time that we've had this particular spirit on the Florida Beer Podcast. I am very, very excited for this festival to return. I will be going to this one as well. And if you want to learn a little bit more, well, you're just going to have to come back next week and listen. The best way for you to find out when those new episodes drop, especially one next week, is to follow us on our socials. We are at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter, at FL Beer Blog on Facebook. You can check us out online at floridabeerblog.com and floridabeerpodcast.com. And we are also a very proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, which you can find at floridapodcastnetwork.com. There you can listen to all the new shows that are coming down the pipeline. Got a lot of great episodes coming up. Got a lot of really cool shows that are coming up, and definitely a lot for you to check out. If you want to reach out to us, feel free to do so at floridabeerblog@gmail.com. Make sure to like us and subscribe to us on the podcasting app of your choice. And if you can, please leave us a nice, juicy 5-star review. It really does help us out with the algorithms and getting our podcast out to new people. If you want to, if you're like our listener friend who is excited about Lost City, hopefully he'll be telling all of his friends to check us out. And if you came here because of him, thank you so much. If you could tell your friends, spread the word, that would be amazing as well. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer for the Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. This is David Butler, your host and author. We will see you next week. And drink Florida Craft.